and welcome back to the IMSA Psych YouTube channel. On today's career conversation, we will be talking to Dr. Jessica Brand, a clinical psychologist, about her experiences in the field and advice for aspiring psychologists. Hope you enjoy.
Hi everyone, so we're Psych Club and we have Dr. Brand here who will be presenting about her career and her education path and all that good stuff. So Lassie will do a quick introduction of Dr. Brand.
Yeah, so thank you for coming to our career conversations. We got our speaker, Dr. Brand, here, and she's got like a doctorate in clinical psychology and in philosophy, and she studied at the University of Pittsburgh and Washington University in St. Louis.
You're good.
She has clinical training in dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and behavioral medicine, and she has a lot of expertise in mood disorders, stress, trauma-related disorders, anxiety disorders, and psychotic disorders. Very fun. So ask her all the questions.
One of the questions that I was told that you all had was like, what does a typical schedule look like? Like, what does a psychologist do during the day or during the typical week? And so this is the schedule of a traditional psychologist who is working in a mental health setting. And this was my schedule right after I graduated and completed my postdoctoral fellowship. And so you can see like, and this is a busy hospital outpatient setting, but you can see lots of meetings, but also just individual sessions with individual patients. I would do committee work. In this case, it was reviewing the files of people who had attempted to end their lives or who had actually ended their lives, looking to see what we could have done differently as a healthcare system. These were not my patients, but just patients being served by the hospital. I would do a couple of groups or one group a day typically. So these are group therapy, different types of group therapy, etc. So you can see it's a pretty busy schedule. And as they said, I'm a clinical psychologist, but I actually trained to be a clinical health psychologist. So after a couple of years working in mental health, I actually changed over when there was a transplant psychology opening. And that is one of the things that I had trained specifically for. So this is working with people who have complex medical conditions, who need a transplant. So maybe they need a new heart, or they need new kidneys or new lung, or maybe they need a stem cell transplant. So that is, they need to have their bone marrow replaced with either their own or someone else's bone marrow. So I worked with these individuals because, as you might imagine, having a complex, very serious health condition like that, there's a lot of psychological types of stressors involved in navigating illness and coming to terms with the risks associated with that illness. Like maybe they won't live as long as they thought they would, or maybe their illness will change how they live their life in some important ways. And so working with individuals before transplant, during the transplant process, and after was kind of what I was hired to do in this particular situation. So here you can see there's a lot more white space, and that's because I worked on a medical unit. So I would be seeing inpatient medical patients during these kinds of periods of time. I had, in both of these situations, kind of a weird schedule, so that not every week was the same. And so that's why it says like typically versus other. I hope you can see all of this, but you can see I'd have big evaluations a couple of times a week, but it was a lot more flexible because everything is very dynamic when you're working with medical inpatients. Things can change very, very quickly for the better or for the worse. And so my role would shift a lot during a given week or month. And that was something I liked about it, that it was no 2 days were ever the same. Actually, within the last year, a little bit over a year, I actually left working in a hospital And now I work in private practice, but I also teach at the University of Washington. I live out here in Seattle. Lots of IMSA kids do. So there's a big group of us. If you join us out here, we'll be happy to welcome you into the group. But I'm a professor now part-time at the University of Washington. I teach psychology for undergraduates. And then the other part of my time, I still see patients. And you can see my week looks a little different. Like I have individual patient slots here, but then I have more open time because with teaching, there's a lot more things that, you know, need to worry or think about, right? Like making sure you're available to meet with students, making sure that you have time to write the lectures and grade the papers, et cetera, et cetera. So this is even more flexible. So there's a lot of different paths that someone might go down as a psychologist, which is, I think, one of the best things about being a psychologist. There's so much flexibility and so many different ways in which you can contribute to the mental and physical health of other human beings. So it's pretty cool. In terms of the educational path, so it is very long. There are two ways to become a psychologist. One of them is shorter than this way. This is the degree that I pursued, which is a PhD, which is the more rigorous and much more competitive pathway. There is a different pathway that is less competitive and is also shorter. And you can get really good training in that pathway. It just kind of, that pathway, there are sometimes fewer opportunities in terms of flexibility with that one versus the one that I did. But neither is inherently better or worse. They're just differently suited towards individuals' different interests. So of course you go to high school, right? So elementary, junior high, or middle school, whatever, high school, then 4 years of college. And then at the school that I went to, which is so I went to college at Washington University, WashU, and then graduate school is at the University of Pittsburgh. And it's a 7-year program. That's 7 years on top of college. And during that time, you do a lot of coursework. You also learn to run your own research studies. So learning how to design a study, how to understand the ethics of running research, how to test hypotheses, analyze results, and write it all up to share with other scientists. You also learn how to work with patients, right? So how to listen, how to help someone, how to provide evidence-based treatment for them. Along the way, you do a lot of different things like your different theses, so like earning a master's degree on the way, different kinds of requirements in terms of projects or exams. And you just move kind of, as you move through the graduate program, you get more independent. And then finally you earn your PhD. And even then you're not really out of school because most people need to do a postdoctoral fellowship. And that can be more experience in research, or it can be more clinical specialty experience, or both. And then finally, you take some national and state exams and you can become licensed and call yourself a psychologist. So it is a really long course. So 24 years of school. And yeah, it's a long path, but one that, in my opinion, is really well worth it. So I think it really depends on what you decide to do. Communication skills are extremely important. So being able to actually talk to people, to clarify what it is that they're saying, to make sure that you're able to communicate about difficult and emotional topics clearly. And I'll also say that that's not something that we're naturally good at. And so you also learn how to do these things. But communication skills is very important. I would say empathy and openness. So being able to kind of really put yourself in that other person's shoes and try to take their perspective on whatever it is that they're struggling with. and remain open to their perspective, their experiences in the world, even if they're really different from your own, and being able to hold that. And then really good research skills. Even if you don't do research, understanding how to interpret and how to read research is very important, so that you know what are appropriate treatment strategies or assessment strategies to figure out kind of how to help the person in front of you. Yeah, so, it's extremely important. It's actually an ethical imperative for psychologists to make sure that they're taking care of themselves, right? Because if I'm not able to take care of myself, then it's going to be extremely hard for me to be appropriately able to take care of someone else, right? And so making sure that I do the things that are necessary for my own health, like exercising and eating right and sleeping. Of course, all of the things that we're told that we need to do, all of those kinds of things, but also things for me personally, I like to practice mindfulness. And so allowing myself different kinds of activities or ways to process the day are really important. Having a lot of friends for social support. There are just a number of ways, but to Dr. Glazer's question, it is extremely important that any of us who are helping other people, whether that's as a psychologist or a physician or any other kind of profession, that we take care of ourselves, because we can't do that work if we are kind of running on empty, right? Yeah. I would say also a lot of psychologists are drawn to this field because growing up, maybe they had friends or family members who struggled with mental health challenges, or perhaps they themselves struggled with mental health challenges. And so this interest in, like, how do we treat these things? How do we help people live better lives? Can be really kind of come from within, right? Like, how do I help myself? And so even if you're a person who struggles with mental health, that can be an incredible strength in terms of, like, you having a really accurate understanding of what it's like, right, to manage things like depression or anxiety. So it's really, don't let that stand in the way if you think that this might be a good career option for you. I guess for me, and I'm a pretty biologically oriented psychologist, like, my research during graduate school was actually molecular genetics. So I really like biology. And I think that that's incredibly important to understand our neural systems as we kind of to understand where people might be able to really succeed in the world, but also how people might get stuck, right, or struggle to succeed. And so for me, it is something that I thought a lot about, but I really wanted to have kind of longer term interactions with people and really get to know them, and feel like I was more part of that recovery journey than is often than many psychiatrists are able to have. Don't get me wrong, psychiatry is extremely important, and I know so many psychiatrists who absolutely love what they do, and so they're a really key component of mental health recovery oftentimes. But I like the idea, like, I get to see my patients, some of them every week, or every other week, whereas many psychiatrists see their patients about once a month and for a much shorter period of time, right? Maybe they have 15 or 20 minutes to work with them, whereas I'll see my patients about 45 minutes a week. So it's just a different nature of the work. And yet, I think, again, both are extremely important, and it can be a hard call to decide which to do. Complicating this further, there are some states that allow psychologists to prescribe medications, and Illinois is one of them. Because there are not enough psychiatrists in the US, there have been movements by other states as well. Washington is currently considering this, that it may be allowable with additional training that psychologists in particular states gain access to, like, licensure or licensure that includes prescription privileges. And so there is also a way in which you could do both. I'll also say there are some psychiatrists who provide a lot of psychotherapy. And so there's also a way that if you wanted to become a psychiatrist, but you really had a strong interest in psychotherapy, there are also ways to make that happen. So there's a lot of pathways and a lot of flexibility. I would say for either one, get involved in research. So maybe that's at IMSA, right? I'm not sure what you call them anymore, but like we used to call them X days or mentorship days. I'm not sure what you call them now. What do you call them now?
I days.
I days. Okay. Inquiry days. Is that what they're? Okay. So maybe that's through I days. In undergrad, right, is another time where you can get involved in research. This is extremely important, first of all, because it tells you if you like the process of research, right? So it helps you figure some things out. But even if you don't like research, there's so many different skills, abilities, and so much knowledge that you can gain in terms of critical thinking and the ways that research works that is really very valuable, and also makes you a much more competitive applicant for medical school or graduate school in psychology. So I'd really encourage you to get those experiences as early as you can. So I was thinking about this a lot. I think for me, two highlights that come to mind. One is the flexibility, right? So there are a lot of jobs that psychologists can hold. There are a lot of things that a psychology degree prepares you well to do, whether you want to like consult with businesses on how they can be more effective, whether you want to help like large systems work better, whether you want to work to promote equity, whether you want to work with individuals to promote individual mental health. There's so many really cool career pathways that are available to psychologists. So that's one really cool thing. The other really cool thing is that you can have a very big impact, right? And for me personally, that's something that's really important and consistent with my values, is kind of making some sort of contribution, even if it's a small one. So that for me, it feels like I'm living my values through my work as a psychologist, which is very meaningful and helps to buffer some of the stress that comes along with, working with people who are really struggling with some really big things in their lives, right? But it feels so meaningful that helps provide a buffer. I think the drawback is that as someone who, I feel really honored to walk alongside someone in their recovery path from a mental health challenge or through a major medical problem or some other life event. But with that, there's also, it can be stressful and it can be a lot to hold. And so one of the drawbacks that we've already kind of talked about is making sure that you're always taking care of yourself so that you can do your job ethically and to the best of your abilities, right? So those are kind of two strengths or pros, and then one thing to kind of keep in mind.
Thank you so much. Do you guys have any questions? Yes. So she asked, which one of your positions did you enjoy the most?
Oh, that's a hard question. I have really enjoyed all three of them, but for different reasons. I really liked working in a medical setting because it would, like I said, every single day was really different. And so there was a lot of variety. Like no Tuesdays were the same, right? And I like that for myself personally. Not everyone likes that, and that's okay. But I did really enjoy that. And I got to work closely with nurses, with pharmacists, with physicians and, nurse practitioners and social workers and dietitians. So I got to work with a lot of different people, as well as patients. So that was a really fun experience. But I would say that I'm happiest doing what I'm doing now, which is now I get kind of the best of all of the worlds. First of all, I get to work from home. So I'm in my home office right now. I get to work with individuals who have traditional mental health challenges, things like anxiety and depression, but I also get to work with those who are struggling with things like medical conditions, right? So I get that blend of things, and I love teaching. And so getting to work with students, helping them know more about psychology, helping them think critically about really important things like, how psychologists can advocate for people in the medical system, right? For example, or what are the biological, but also the psychological, social, and sociocultural determinants of health. That feels also really meaningful and is really fun. So I would say that I'm happiest where I am now, and there's a lot of perks to kind of having both of those roles for me personally. Well, I think the ones that are most complicated, of course, always deal with risk. So where someone might be a risk to themselves or a risk to other people. Those are the most complicated because they involve really weighty decisions about taking steps to protect people, which ultimately also can limit some of that person's rights, their civil liberties. And so those situations are really weighty because we have to do what we can in accordance with whatever the laws are where we live and in accordance with the ethics code to try to keep people safe. And yet we also have to balance that or kind of with the fact that keeping people safe sometimes involves limiting temporarily some of those rights that they would normally have. And those are really hard decisions. Those are really, really hard decisions. But fortunately, in psychology, just like in medicine, right, even if we typically see patients alone, we consult with one another to figure out, like, help me think through this problem. Help me see if there's a different perspective. Am I missing something? What's another way we could think about this? What do you think about the ethical kinds of factors that are at play here? And so consulting while maintaining patient confidentiality is one way that we psychologists, again, as physicians do as well, figure out, like, combine our heads and figure out, like, what is the best choice? What's the best course of action? Well, I actually quit my job during the beginning of the pandemic. So that was a big factor. I think some exciting things, right? So I see all of my clients over telehealth, just like this. And telehealth makes mental health care so much more accessible for people who might live in a rural area, who might not have transportation, who might have a hard time getting away from work, or have many other roles and obligations. So I think that's a huge and important thing that's happened in the pandemic, is we've shown that telehealth is effective, it's accessible, people really like it, patients like it, but providers like it as well. And so that it kind of goes towards moving towards more equitable access for other people. So that's a good thing. I would say that the pandemic, though, has exacerbated everyone's stress, right? And we know that mental health needs keep climbing. So more people are seeking mental health care. What I found is some of my patients who I think probably would have improved a lot faster in a normal context, it's just taking a bit longer because there's so many parts of life that are more complicated and or more uncertain for them, that it makes it hard to really focus only on their depression when they've got also other real life issues going on, right? And so I think, we're seeing right now that mental health really has to be prioritized more by us as individuals, but also within systems. And mental health providers are really, we really need more of them.
On behalf of IMSA Psych Club, thank you so much for watching our video. Please remember to subscribe for more great psych content. And remember to stay psyched.